She was alone. Completely, entirely, devastatingly alone. Krell's gaze moved to the cockpit, or what remained of it. Two figures were still strapped in their seats. The impact had been catastrophic and instantaneous. Parents, almost certainly. The ship's manifest screen flickered weakly nearby, partially readable through cracked glass. Torres family transport. Destination, New Seattle Colony. They had not made it. Something shifted in Krell's chest. A sensation he didn't have a word for in his language. A cracking, structural sort of feeling, like a weight-bearing wall developing a fracture it hadn't budgeted for. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him. Leave. Walk away. This is not your problem, not your species, not your responsibility. Vacerians are solitary. We do not adopt the young of others. We do not form attachments to things that will only break us when they are gone. You survive alone. You thrive alone. You die alone. This is a way. He reached forward anyway. His massive, clawed hand moved with a gentleness that would have utterly baffled anyone who knew him. The child flinched at first contact, a full-body tremor that spoke of pain and terror working in terrible concert, and Krell immediately pulled back, hissing softly through his teeth. Not at her, at himself, at this impossible, infuriating, necessary situation. He opened his field kit. It was a hunter's kit, stock for himself, antiseptic gel, bone-knit patches, broad-spectrum pain suppressors calibrated for Vacerian physiology. He had absolutely no idea whether any of it would function correctly on a human child biology, but doing nothing was not something his body seemed willing to accept, regardless of what his better judgment had to say about it. This will hurt, he said. His voice was a deep, resonant rumble that he immediately worried was too loud, too strange, too frightening. The child's brown eyes went wider. He cleaned the wounds first, working with painstaking delicacy, treating each cut before applying the antiseptic gel. Krell the undefeated, playing field medic to a human child. If his pack could see him now, the thought should have brought shame. Instead, it just made his hand stay steadier. The child bore it with a fortitude that surprised him. Small gasps when the antiseptic hit raw skin. Silent tears tracking clean lines through the grime on her face. But no screaming, no thrashing, no desperate attempts to flee. Just endurance. Quiet, stubborn, remarkable endurance. Amaya, she whispered suddenly, her voice barely a breath. He paused. What? My name. It's Maya. Humans always did this. Always wanted to exchange names, to forge connection out of nothing, to make the personal out of the impersonal. Krell understood it intellectually. Social bonding behaviors, evolutionary mechanisms for building cooperative networks. He had always found it faintly absurd. Krell, he said finally, because leaving her question unanswered felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. A silence. Then, with devastating seriousness, are you going to eat me? The question caught him so completely off guard that he laughed. A short, barking sound that bounced off the wreckage and startled something in the canopy above into frantic flight. No, small thing. I am not going to eat you. Your kind tastes terrible. A pause. Or so I am told. Was he attempting humor with a critically injured human child? What was happening to him? But something shifted in Maya's expression. The corners of her cracked lips twitched, the ghost of a smile moving across her face like a brief ray of light through storm clouds. Mummy said aliens were scary, she murmured, her eyelids growing heavy with exhaustion and pain. But you're helping me. Mummy, past tense, a word used without understanding of its own terrible weight. Krell did not look toward the cockpit again. He secured the bone-knit patch around her broken arm, watching the smart material conform and stiffen around the injury. He administered a carefully calculated dose of pain suppressors, estimated for her body mass. A guess he hoped was close enough. He worked in silence because there was nothing adequate to say, and because the forest around him was beginning to carry other sounds now. Closer sounds. Hungry sounds. The distant cry of a Ravager pack rove from the south. Six-legged scavengers, relentless as time, that could reduce a carcass to scattered bone in minutes. They would have caught the scent of blood and burning fuel from kilometers away. They were coming. And then, worse, far worse, layered beneath the Ravager coals like a shadow beneath a shadow, a familiar scent. Vacerian. His own kind, drawn by the crash site's beacon of chaos and potential opportunity. Krell looked at Maya, this small, broken, impossible thing that had somehow become his problem in the span of 20 minutes. Staying meant her death. Slow, if the Ravagers arrived first. Fast, if his people did. He should leave. He scooped her up with both arms, cradling her against his chest with impossible care. She weighed nothing. Less than nothing. Light as promises. Fragile as glass. "We are moving," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "You will be silent. You will be still. Do you understand?" Maya nodded against the leather strap crossing his chest, her small hand curling around it like an anchor, and Krell moved into the forest, carrying her away from the wreckage and into the green darkness toward a cave system he knew 2 kilometers north. Defensible, hidden, dry. He still had no answer to the question already forming in the back of his mind. Why are you doing this? What broken piece of his psyche had decided this was a reasonable course of action? He kept moving anyway. The child's heartbeat was a rapid, fragile flutter against his chest, the most stubborn, persistent little sound in the universe. Proof that something this small and this damaged could still refuse, absolutely and completely, to stop. 3 days. 3 days of shelter in a cave that smelled of minerals and deep time. 3 days of listening to every breath of wind for sounds that didn't belong. 3 days of watching the tree line while something behind him hummed quietly to itself and asked questions he didn't always know how to answer. Krell sat at the cave entrance in the gray light of the second morning, his eyes moving ceaselessly across the forest below. Ravager packs circled at night, their calls echoing through the dark with a patience that bordered on philosophical. Climbing serpents tested the rock face during the day, drawn by warmth and the promise of easy prey. And always, always, the underlying worry that one of his own kind would catch a scent on the wind and come to investigate. He had treated Maya's wounds as best he could with what he had. The bonnet patch was doing its work, slowly, imperfectly, but the arm was held, the break contained. The pain suppressors had helped her sleep through the worst of the first night, and by the second morning she had been sitting up, watching him with those enormous brown eyes, full of questions she clearly wasn't sure she was allowed to ask. She had cried the first night. He had expected that. What he hadn't expected was a specific texture of it, not the wild, panic crying of shock, but something quieter and more devastating. Grief that had already accepted what it was grieving. She cried for her mother, for her father, for the station apartment and the pancakes with syrup faces on Sunday mornings and the promise her father had made about teaching her to fly. Krell had sat beside her in the dark cave feeling utterly, completely useless. His entire evolutionary heritage, 10,000 years of predatory supremacy, honed instinct, physical power that could shatter bone, provided exactly zero useful guidance on how to comfort a grieving child of another species. He had done the only thing that felt available to him. He stayed close. He didn't move away. Apparently, that had been enough. At some point in the small hours of the night, she had pressed herself against his side and slept, trusting him with a total, terrifying completeness that only very young things seemed capable of. He had not moved until morning. Krell. He turned. Maya was holding out half a ration bar toward him, her small hand extended with the gravity of a significant offering. Chocolate was smeared at the corner of her mouth. She had clearly already eaten her half. "I have my own food," he said, gesturing to the thornback meat he had finally tracked and killed yesterday. Raw, bloody, precisely as it should be. Maya looked at his meal, made a face of profound, sincere disgust, then pushed the ration bar closer. "But this one has chocolate. Mommy said sharing is important." She spoke of her mother in past tense now. The cruel efficiency of a child's mind accepting what it cannot change, building the loss into the foundation of the world rather than being crushed beneath it. Krell didn't have a name for the particular ache that observation produced in him, but it sat behind his sternum like a stone. He took the ration bar. It tasted like processed sugar and laboratory chemicals and things that had never been near an actual food source in their manufactured lives. He ate every crumb. "Thank you," he said. The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign, a little clumsy. His people did not typically say them. Gratitude was a transactional thing among Vacerians, understood through action, never spoken aloud. Maya beamed at him as if he had handed her a planet. The days built a strange rhythm. Maya talked. She talked with the relentless, unself-conscious energy of a child for whom silence was not a comfort but an absence. She told him about their apartment on the orbital station, the way the light came through the viewport in the mornings, the particular sound the recycled air made, the neighbor who kept a small shell creature and let Maya visit it sometimes. She told him about her father Marcus, a Marine commander stationed at the New Seattle colony, how he smelled like ship oil and safety. She told him about her mother Elena, who made extraordinary pancakes. She drew faces in the syrup. Maya said on the second afternoon, her voice carrying the particular soft quality that meant she was visiting somewhere she could no longer go. Smiley faces and stars, and one time she did a fish. She said breakfast should always start with a smile. Pancakes, syrup, Sunday mornings. Krell had no frame of reference for any of it, but he could hear the love in her voice as clearly as he could read tracks in soft earth. He understood what it meant even if he had no equivalent. Vacerians did not have Sunday mornings. They did not have breakfast rituals or shared meals or small domestic ceremonies designed to make ordinary moments feel sacred. Was that what made humans weak? This attachment that left wounds so deep when it was severed? Or was it something else entirely? On the third day, he began teaching her things. He showed her which plants were safe, the ones that would not poison her if she was ever desperate and alone. He taught her how to read a stream sound to find clean water, how to use the sun's position to understand direction. He had no clear explanation for why he was doing it. She would be rescued, presumably. She would return to a world where these skills were largely irrelevant. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked, touching a patch of blue moss he had just explained indicated clean water nearby. "Because knowledge keeps you alive," he said. It was the answer he gave himself. "Is that why you saved me? To teach me things?" The question landed harder than he expected. He sat with it for a moment, turning it over. "I do not know," he said finally. The honesty surprised him a little. Maya considered this with the absolute seriousness that children reserve for truly important matters. Then she reached out and patted his arm, his scaled, clawed predator's arm, with her small, bare hand. "That's okay," she said. "Mommy said sometimes we do good things without knowing why." She called it kindness. Kindness. He had always considered it a human word for weakness dressed up in virtue, a rationalization that the small and the soft told themselves to make their dependencies feel noble. But as Maya settled against his side in the fading afternoon light, as trustful as if he were made of safety rather than teeth and claws and a lifetime of calculated violence, Krell felt the fracture in his chest widen further. She should fear him. Any rational creature would. He was an apex predator who had spent his entire life being exactly that, and she was leaning against him like he was a warm wool. She shared her chocolate. She told him stories. She patted his arm and called him friend. What kind of species raised their young to give trust so freely? To extend affection without condition, even after the universe had taken everything from them? Krell. Her voice was drowsy, weighted with exhaustion. "Yes, small thing. Will someone come find us?" He wanted to promise her. The impulse was immediate and surprising, to offer certainty, to give her hope regardless of whether he could back it up. But he thought of the disabled beacon, of how remote this region was, of how long the odds were. "I do not know," he said, "but until they do, I will keep you safe." Maya smiled against his scales. He felt it more than saw it, a small warmth spreading through the hard surface. "I know," she said. "You're my friend." Friend. As the third night settled over the forest and Maya's breathing deepened into sleep, Krell remained awake, watching, listening, and, for the first time in his considerable life, genuinely uncertain whether the creature he had always believed himself to be was the whole truth of what he was. The fourth morning arrived before full light, and with it, a scent that turned Krell's blood to ice. He was on his feet before conscious thought had finished processing the input, every muscle coiled with the sudden, explosive tension of a predator who has just realized he is no longer the most dangerous thing in the immediate vicinity. The scent was unmistakable, Vacerian, his own kind, and close. Multiple individuals. He moved to the cave entrance without a sound, positioning himself between the darkness behind him and the tree line below. Behind him, he heard Maya stir. He held up one clawed hand without turning. She went still. 3 days had been enough to teach her that when his scales darkened and his posture became that particular kind of motionless, Something serious was coming. She had learned to read him faster than he had expected. They emerged from the tree line like shadows given substance and intention. 5 of them, moving in the loose, deliberate formation of hunters who had done this together many times, circling wide to cut off retreat, angling to force whoever was at the center of their attention into a narrowing kill zone. Professional, ruthlessly efficient. At the front, scales gleaming like polished volcanic glass in the early light, walked Drax. Of course it was Drax. Well, Drax called up, his voice carrying across the clearing with the smooth precision of someone who had practiced sounding dangerous and had long since mastered it. Krell the Mighty, reduced to sheltering in caves like wounded prey. How the great become ordinary. The others spread out with practice ease. Krell recognized them all. His hunting pack, the ones he had left behind weeks ago. Vex, youngest and most eager, always trying to prove something. Shira, calculating and cold, who never spoke when a silence would do more damage. Rax and Maud, the twins, who moved and thought as a single organism with twice the natural weaponry. His pack, his people, his threat, Drax. Krell kept his voice level, conversational. This territory is claimed. Move on. Claimed. Drax laughed, a sound like boulders shifting against each other. By what right? You abandon the pack, Krell. You don't get to claim territory without completing your hunt. That's not how this works. Movement at his leg. A small hand gripped the leather strap across his thigh. Maya had moved up silently behind him, pressing herself against his side, peering around him at the strangers with enormous, wary eyes. 5 pairs of predatory eyes locked onto her instantly. The air in the clearing changed, the casual mockery evaporating, replaced by something sharper and far more dangerous. A human, Vex breathed, moving forward half a step before catching himself. A young one. She is not a prize. Krell's voice dropped to a register that made the word vibrate through the ground. It was not a statement. It was a perimeter. Drax's head tilted in the precise way that Vacerians did when they encountered something that didn't fit their existing models. Then what is she? You're not going to tell me you developed a taste for... She is under my protection. Silence, the kind that preceded either negotiation or violence, and offered no guarantee which. Then Drax laughed again, and this time the sound had something almost genuine in it, the laughter of someone who has heard an excellent joke they intend to be very unkind about. Protection. Krell, have you lost your mind entirely? We protect our own. We exploit the rest. That is the law. That has always been the law. The human government is offering substantial reward for surviving colonists, Shira said from the left, her voice carrying the flat quality of someone who has already run the numbers. A living child would command a fortune. Credits, technology, territorial concessions. The calculus is straightforward. She is not for sale. Then she is leverage. Drax moved forward, and Krell matched him step for step, keeping his body between the pack and Maya with the patient, immovable certainty of a mountain. Human Marines will pay any price to recover their young. We negotiate from a position of absolute strength. The pack profits. Everyone benefits. Everyone except her. Drax's scales flushed darker, the mottled crimson of genuine anger beginning to bleed through. What has happened to you? 3 days ago you were one of us. A hunter. One of the best. Now you stand here defending a human child like she is one of your own hatchlings. He took another step. Tell me this is strategy, Krell. Tell me you have an angle I'm not seeing. Because the alternative is that you have lost everything that made you who you are. I saved a dying child, Krell said. I carried her to safety. I kept her alive. If that is what you call loss, then I'm beginning to wonder what we have been calling gain. Weakness. Vex spat the word like something that tasted foul. We are Vacerians. We are the apex of our evolutionary history. We do not coddle the weak. We do not nurse the fallen of other species, and we absolutely do not throw away profit and glory for sentimentality. Maya's hand tightened on Krell's strap. He could feel her trembling, the small, continuous vibration of a child who is very frightened and trying very hard not to show it. She did not run. She pressed closer to him instead. That small gesture, that complete, unconditional trust, did something to the architecture of his resolve. It did not shake it. It reinforced it, in a way that no argument could touch. "I will say this once," Krell said, and his voice dropped to the register that his pack had learned, over years, to associate with the moments before things became irreversible. "The child stays with me. You will leave now. If you do not, I will make it very difficult for some of you to leave at all." Rax and Maud exchanged a glance. Shira stopped circling. Even Vex went quiet, some instinct older than loyalty calculating odds. But Drax had never learned when to stop. You would fight your own people. For that. He gestured at Maya with something beyond contempt, a kind of baffled revulsion, as if the concept of what Krell was doing was aesthetically offensive to him. "Look at her, Krell. She will be dead before she reaches maturity by our reckoning. Her entire civilization will have risen and fallen before our species has finished a single migration cycle. You would betray everything you are for something so temporary." A long pause. The forest held its breath. "Yes," Krell said simply. The word hung in the air of the clearing like a blade suspended at its apex. Drax's lips peeled back, exposing every serrated tooth. "Then you are no longer Pack. You are no longer Vacerian. You are nothing." "You are weak," Vex hissed. "You are corrupted," Shira added. "You are a disgrace," the twins said in unison. Each word arrived like a precisely aimed strike, designed to shame, designed to fracture his certainty, to make the cost of his choice feel greater than the thing he was choosing. Behind him, barely audible, "Krell, I'm scared." "I know, small thing. Stay behind me." Drax's claws extended with a sound like drawn steel, each one as long as Maya's forearm, curved and serrated and built for exactly one purpose. "Last chance," he said. "Give us the child. Rejoin the pack. We forget this moment of madness." Krell's own claws came out. The sound they made was slower, more deliberate, final. "Come and take her." The clearing erupted. Drax came in fast and without preamble, a blur of scale and fury, and Krell met him headlong. Their bodies collided with a concussive force that shook leaves from the canopy above, two apex predators operating at the full capacity of everything evolution had spent millennia building. Claws raked across scales. Teeth snapped at exposed throats. They grappled with the furious, intimate violence of creatures who had trained together for years and therefore knew exactly how to hurt each other. Krell drove an elbow into Drax's jaw and created enough space to turn. Vex was circling wide, eyes fixed on Maya, looking for a gap. Krell's tail whipped around with full force and caught the younger hunter across the chest, launching him into the tree line. A tree cracked. Vex didn't immediately get up. Shira came from the left, the twins from the right. Three at once. Krell was good. He was very, very good. Better than most living Vacerians at the specific art of applying controlled violence to chaotic situations. But 4 against 1, with Drax already recovering and re-entering on his flank, was mathematics that didn't favor him. He knew it. He fought anyway. He fought like every ancestor in his bloodline had ever fought. But for the first time in his life, he was fighting for someone else. That changed something. Not the technique, not the ferocity, but the quality of the determination underneath it. There was nothing calculating about it. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to not let them through. Drax caught him across the ribs. Pain exploded white and hot. Shira opened a gash along his shoulder. The twins, working in their perfect concert, drove him back 3 steps, and those 3 steps were too many, because they opened a sight line to Maya. Vex, recovered and furious, was moving toward her. Krell made a choice. He stopped defending himself entirely and threw his whole body between Vex and the child, taking a blow across his back that he would feel for weeks. He caught Vex by the throat and drove him into the ground, holding him there. Drax hit him from behind like a wall collapsing. He was losing. He had known it from the moment the mathematics clarified, and he had kept fighting anyway because the alternative was unacceptable. But the body was beginning to send messages that the mind couldn't override indefinitely. His vision was narrowing at the edges. Blood, his and theirs mixed, was making the ground dark and slick beneath him. Maya was going to die. And then the sky split open. The sound arrived first, a screaming, high-pitched whine that cut through the noise of combat like a blade through atmosphere, growing louder and angrier with each fraction of a second, dropping from directly above with the speed of something that had been traveling very fast for a very long time and had just arrived at the end of that journey. Drax's head snapped up, his claws still embedded in Krell's shoulder. What is? The first drop pod hit the clearing like the fist of something incomprehensibly large. The impact shockwave knocked everyone off their feet. Soil and fractured stone erupted outward in a ring of kinetic fury, and before the dust had even begun to settle, the pod's sides blew open with explosive precision. Out stepped a figure in powered armor that made Vacerian scale plating look decorative by comparison. Enormous, purpose-built, moving with the fluid, mechanical certainty of something that had never once in its operational life been uncertain about anything. Then the second pod hit, then the third, then 3 more, in rapid succession, each one landing with geometric precision to form a perfect perimeter around the clearing before the echo of the last impact had finished rolling across the forest. 6 drop pods, deployed from orbit with military accuracy in under 15 seconds. The mathematics of the clearing changed completely. Krell pulled himself upright, bleeding from 6 places, and moved Maya behind him by reflex. The hunting pack had frozen, their prey drive and combat instincts issuing contradictory orders, neither fight nor flight presenting itself as clearly viable, both options suddenly looking considerably worse than they had 60 seconds ago. The Marines moved with a unified, economical precision of people who had rehearsed this exact scenario until individual thought had been largely replaced by collective choreography. Weapons up, angles covered, exits sealed. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The particular professional stillness of controlled violence being held in careful reserve. Contact. One of them spoke in a voice flattened by helmet speakers into something efficient and mechanical. Multiple Vacerian hostiles. Human juvenile located. She appears mobile. A second voice, carrying a different quality of authority, the kind that came not from rank insignia but from being someone people simply obeyed without requiring explanation. Maya Webb. A pause. Then, from behind Krell, so quietly it barely existed. Daddy. One of the Marines was already moving differently than the others. Faster, less controlled, the discipline cracking around something that couldn't be contained by training. He dropped to one knee, and his helmet retracted with a hydraulic hiss. The face beneath was older than Krell had expected. Hair going gray at the temples. Deep lines around eyes that held the specific, concentrated exhaustion of someone who had not slept voluntarily in days. The face of someone who had been running on pure, terrible, sustaining desperation. Those eyes found Maya, and they filled with something that hit Krell like a physical force, love and relief and desperate gratitude colliding at once, producing something that looked very much like a man coming apart at the seams in the best possible way. Maya. The voice broke on her name. Oh, thank God. She ran, small legs pumping with a total commitment that only children and people who have stopped calculating risk can manage, crossing the space between them in heartbeats. Marcus caught her and pulled her in, armored chest and all, and held on with a desperate, iron grip of someone who has been imagining this moment for 4 days and still can't quite believe it's real. He was shaking. A grown Marine commander, decorated and scarred and built for exactly the kind of chaos currently surrounding him on all sides, was shaking with sobs he couldn't contain and clearly wasn't trying to. I thought we lost you, he managed, his voice buried in her hair. I thought we lost you, sweetheart. I thought. I'm okay, Daddy, Maya said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Then, smaller, Mommy's not coming, is she? It wasn't a question. It was understanding arriving late and heavy, and Marcus Webb absorbed it the way parents absorb the worst things, entirely, quietly, holding his daughter tighter and not answering because the answer was already known and spoken in the silence between them. Krell looked away. Commander Torres had stepped forward during this. A different figure from Marcus, harder, more angular, built from stone and bad decisions and the specific kind of wisdom that came from surviving everything that had tried to kill him. He regarded the frozen hunting pack with a calm, assessing attention of something at the top of a food chain that had never had any reason to be nervous about what it found. Stand down, Torres said quietly. Or don't. Your choice. It was a remarkable sentence in its absolute absence of bluster. Not a threat issued from a position of needing to establish dominance. Just a simple statement of how the next few minutes would go, regardless of what the Vacerians decided. Drax, who had never learned, bristled. You dare. We are Vacerian hunters. We do not bow to soft-skinned species who hide behind machines and armor, Anne. Torres smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind that appeared on the face of someone who has just been given exactly the opening they were waiting for. Jenkins. Duration. Heat signature suggests hostile arrival approximately 4 minutes ago, sir. Evidence of recent combat. Blood analysis indicates 1 friendly, 4 hostile. Friendly? Shira's voice was sharp with confusion. Torres's gaze moved to Krell, still standing, still bleeding, positioned between the pack and where Maya now was. The commander's expression did something complicated, not softening exactly, recalibrating. Martinez, how long have we been tracking the beacon? 4 days, 6 hours, sir. Since the crash site, distance covered, 237 light-years, 3 jump points. Torres let that land. Watched it hit the hunting pack. Watched the numbers register on faces built for calculation. Every ship we could commandeer or requisition, he continued. Fuel burned that could power a small colony for a year. Patrol vessels pulled from active defense assignments. Civilian transit routes disrupted. He took 1 step toward Drax, and the entire Marine formation shifted fractionally in response, a subtle, unified adjustment that made the clearing field considerably smaller. We crossed 237 light-years in 4 days. Do you know why? Drax said nothing. For the first time in all the years Krell had known him, he had nothing to say. Because she is ours, Torres said. His voice had gone cold and absolute. Because every human child is ours. Because we will burn the galaxy to ash before we leave one of our own behind. He took another step. Drax took 1 back. And then, like a slow and inevitable collapse, the rest of the pack took 1 back too. Not from fear exactly, because Vacerians didn't admit to fear, but from the dawning recognition that they were in the presence of something operating on a completely different set of principles. Something that didn't negotiate from weakness, didn't posture for dominance, didn't leave its people behind. Something that crossed 237 light-years for a 4-year-old girl, because that was simply what it did. The one who protected her walks away, Torres continued. The rest of you have committed attempted trafficking of a minor. That is a capital offense in 14 systems. We happen to be standing in one of them. The smile returned, briefly, without warmth. The Vacerian government will decide what to do with you. I suspect they will not be pleased. The Marines moved as one. A choreographed machine of armor and purpose and absolute professional conviction. The hunting pack, apex predators, undefeated hunters, feared across the frontier systems, were surrounded, disarmed, and restrained in under 30 seconds. Drax was still shouting about sovereignty. Nobody was listening. Torres walked toward Krell slowly, the way you approach something wounded that remained capable of being dangerous, which was accurate on both counts. You saved her, Torres said. Krell looked at him, at Maya, safe in her father's arms, alive and whole and holding on with both hands. Alive because he had made a choice that violated every principle his people had spent generations building their identity upon. She was dying alone, Krell said. Leaving her felt wrong. Torres studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded, the nod of a person who has heard the essential truth of something and recognized it immediately. Yeah, he said. It was. A pause. Then, louder. Medic, get this one treated. He's coming with us. Commander, Krell started. That wasn't a request, Torres said, without particular heat. You saved one of ours. That puts you in a category we have specific protocols for. Here's my friend. Maya called from Marcus's arms, over her father's shoulder, watching Krell with worried brown eyes. He comes. That's the rule. Marcus Webb looked at his daughter, then at the alien predator bleeding steadily in the middle of the clearing. Something moved across his face, gratitude and grief and confusion doing complicated, difficult work in a limited amount of emotional space. Then he comes, Marcus said. The medical bay aboard the human ship was aggressively, almost offensively clean. The lights were calibrated for human visual comfort, which meant they were slightly too bright and slightly too blue for Vacerian preference. Everything smelled of antiseptic compounds and recycled atmosphere, and the particular flat sterility that advanced species applied to medical spaces as if illness was primarily a matter of insufficient cleanliness. Krell sat on a reinforced bench, Someone had found or fabricated it at apparently significant effort, because it was built for his weight and frame, while a human medic no larger than Maya worked on closing the gashes Drax had left across his ribs. She had the focused, no-nonsense demeanor of someone who treated whatever arrived in front of them without much concern for what species it happened to belong to. "Hold still," she said. "The biogel needs another minute to adhere properly." He held still. He discovered, considerably better at that than he had been a week ago. The door slid open. Marcus Webb entered. He was out of his armor now, just a soft underlayer that made him look smaller, more human in a way that armor obscured. The dangerous, territorial quality in his eyes had not diminished in proportion to his apparent size. If anything, stripped of the martial trappings, it was more visible, paternal, protective, the particular brand of violence that existed only to keep something precious safe. He dismissed the medic with a look. She read it fluently and left, letting the door close behind her. Marcus stood for a moment, looking at Krell the way a person looks at something they have not yet fully decided what to make of. "My daughter," he said finally, his voice carrying the careful roughness of a man choosing every word precisely because the imprecise ones might break something, "was in a crash that killed her mother. She was alone, injured, surrounded by predators and wilderness and 100 things that should have finished what the crash started." Krell said nothing. "And you," Marcus continued, "a Vacerian hunter, a species that by every profile we have treats other races as either competition or prey. You found her." "Yes." "You could have left her. Every protocol I have for understanding your people says you should have left her." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" The question arrived and settled, and Krell spent a moment with it. The same question he had been carrying for 4 days without finding an answer that fully satisfied him. "Because she was alone," he said at last. "Because walking away would have made me something I didn't want to be. I don't have a more sophisticated answer than that." Marcus absorbed this. His jaw worked. His eyes, tired, red-rimmed, the eyes of someone who had not slept properly since a ship disappeared from a nav beacon 4 days ago, moved to the middle distance and then came back. "She told me everything," he said. "How you cleaned her wounds, carried her 2 kilometers to safe shelter, taught her to find water, shared your food, how you stood between her and 5 of your own kind and fought until we arrived." "I lost that fight," Krell said, looking at his wounds. "You held them off long enough for us to get there." Something shifted in Marcus's voice. "That's not losing. By any measure that matters, that's winning." The door opened again. Torres entered, followed closely by Maya, who had been cleaned up and had her arm properly set in a medical cast now covered in colorful illustrations applied by, apparently, the entire marine complement. Dinosaurs, spaceships, and in the center, rendered in purple and deep red with impressive conviction if limited technical skill, a portrait of Krell himself. She saw him across the room and her face transformed, that particular, specific quality of joy that children possessed, undiluted by irony or uncertainty or the learned caution of people who have been hurt too many times. "Krell!" She ran across the room and wrapped both arms around his leg with a force that was genuinely impressive for her size, pressing her face against his scales with complete and unconditional trust. Krell's hand settled on the top of her head, gently, automatically, as if it had been doing this for years. "Hello, small thing. You look considerably better. The doctor says my arm will be completely healed in 2 weeks. She pulled back to look up at him, eyes wide with important information to convey. "She gave me ice cream. Do you know what ice cream is? It is the most important thing anyone has ever given me. It is amazing." Something happened in Marcus Webb's expression. The protective suspicion didn't disappear. It probably would never disappear entirely, and Krell found he respected that. But it made room. Genuine, reluctant, complicated room. Understanding moving in alongside grief. Torres cleared his throat. "The Vacerian government has agreed to take custody of your former pack members. They are not pleased about the trafficking charges. It's an embarrassment to the species, as you probably know." A pause. "They also expressed confusion about your actions, called them unprecedented, indicated you'd likely face exile for this." Krell nodded. He had expected nothing less. Vacerians did not forgive deviation from the code. He had chosen an outsider over his pack, had protected weakness instead of exploiting it, had allowed himself to be changed by something his people would categorize without hesitation as sentiment. He was no longer one of them. That fact was as clear as anything he had ever known. Strangely, it sat lighter than he had imagined it would. "We owe you a debt," Torres continued. "Command has authorized me to offer you several options. Safe passage to any Vacerian world of your choosing. Asylum here, if exile is imminent. Work permits in human space. Citizenship, eventually, if you want it." Citizenship. Krell said the word slowly, testing its weight. "You protected a human child when you had every reason not to," Marcus said quietly. His hand was on Maya's shoulder, fingers gentle despite their strength. "In the ways that matter most, that makes you family. My people take care of family." Family, pack, connection, all the words pointing at the same thing, the same fierce, absolute, costly business of belonging to something larger than yourself. Krell looked at Maya, at her bright, trusting eyes and the easy warmth of a child who had lost everything and was still, somehow, finding reasons to smile. He thought about 3 days in a mineral-scented cave, about shared chocolate and stories about pancakes with syrup faces and Sunday mornings, about a small hand patting his arm and the word friend given as casually and completely as breathing. He thought about Drax's words, corruption, weakness, disgrace, the vocabulary his people used for everything they couldn't categorize as strength. He thought about Marcus Webb, who had crossed 237 light-years because his daughter needed him, about Torres, who had burned enough fuel to power a colony because every human child was worth the cost, about the Marines who had dropped from orbit with mathematical precision and absolute professional fury because one small girl was in danger, about how none of them had hesitated, not one, not for a single second, not weakness, not even close. These humans, they cared violently, completely, without reservation or calculation. They would burn galaxies for their young. They would extend their hands across species lines to alien predators who had done one right thing in one right moment. They were terrifying not because of their weapons or their ships or their armor, but because of the absolute, unconditional ferocity of what they felt. They loved like it was the sharpest weapon they possessed. They claimed like it was sacred. They didn't leave anyone behind. They were strong in ways Vacerians had never thought to want to be. "I would like to accept your offer," Krell said slowly. "I have no pack to return to. No place among my own kind any longer." "Then you have a place among ours," Torres said. No hesitation, no qualification. As simple and as absolute as anything Krell had ever heard. Maya made a sound of pure, uncontainable delight and tightened her grip on his leg with both arms. Marcus Webb looked at his daughter, this small, extraordinary, resilient creature who had survived the unsurvivable and come through it still capable of giving her trust freely. Then he looked at the alien predator she was currently clinging to with complete conviction. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice rough with something he made no attempt to hide. "He stays." Later, after the medical bay, after the reports, after the formal processing of custody arrangements and diplomatic notifications and all the bureaucratic machinery that inevitably attended extraordinary events, Krell stood at an observation window in a quiet corridor of the ship. Epsilon Reach was small below them, the forest canopy a green-blue blur from this altitude, the crash site invisible, the cave invisible, the clearing where everything had changed invisible. The world had swallowed all evidence of what had happened there. In a few weeks, the forest would have reclaimed the wreckage entirely. That was the way of wild places. They did not preserve the marks that lives left in them. Maya stood beside him. She had found him here without being directed, following some instinct he didn't entirely understand, but was beginning to trust the way he had learned to trust the sound of clean water in the dark. Her small hand had slipped into his large clawed one with the absolute lack of self-consciousness of someone who had decided, completely and without further deliberation, that this was where her hand belonged. They stood in silence for a while, the companionable kind, the kind that had taken 3 days in a cave to build and would take considerably longer to fully understand. "Krell," she said softly, not looking away from the window. "Yes, small thing. Thank you for being my friend." A pause, quiet as snow. "Mommy would have liked you." Krell's throat tightened. An unfamiliar sensation. Not pain, not quite, but something that occupied similar territory and asked similar things of him. He stayed with it instead of pushing it away. He was getting better at that. "I would have liked to know her," he said, and he meant it in the way that only the simplest, most honest things can be meant. The ship's engine shifted pitch, the navigation system announcing its readiness for the jump sequence. Through the observation window, the stars began their slow, preparatory brightening, the universe gathering itself for the extraordinary routine of folding distance into nothing. Krell thought about the word his people had always used for what he was about to lose. Exile, disgrace, the end of belonging. He looked at Maya's reflection in the dark glass, small and bright and impossibly resilient, leaning against his side with a complete and unconditional trust, and he understood, with a clarity that arrived quietly and settled permanently, that his people had simply been using the wrong vocabulary for a very long time. This was not losing something. This was finding out that the thing he'd thought was everything had been much smaller than he believed, and that the thing waiting on the other side of the choice he'd made was considerably, immeasurably larger. The jump drive engaged. The stars stretched into lines of impossible light, the universe folding itself to accommodate the speed of a ship that had somewhere to be and people aboard who were going there together. Epsilon Reach disappeared. The frontier vanished. And ahead, through the observation window, the great scattered fire of the galaxy opened up in every direction, vast and old and indifferent and magnificent. Krell had walked into a forest alone, intending to prove something to himself. He had found a crash site instead. A child. A choice. A fracture in every assumption he had built his life upon. He had learned that mercy was not weakness, that protection was not corruption, that the strongest thing a predator could do was choose, deliberately, at cost, against every instinct that screamed otherwise, not to hunt. And as Maya leaned against his side in the starlight, safe and warm and quietly humming some human song he didn't know the name of, Krell understood something that his people, for all their pride, had never been strong enough to learn. The humans guarded their own with a ferocity that made apex predators look domesticated. They loved like it was warfare. They crossed 237 light years of empty space for a 4-year-old girl because she was theirs, and theirs meant forever. And forever meant you burned whatever needed burning and moved whatever needed moving and did not, under any circumstances, leave anyone behind. Now, impossibly, miraculously, through a single choice made in a single moment of inexplicable rightness, he was one of theirs. 2. The galaxy would never look the same. A Hybrid Shadow's original story. Thank you for reading. The scent hit Krell's nostrils like a fist to the skull, sharp, metallic, and deeply wrong. It cut through the thick, humid air of a frontier world they called Epsilon Reach with the precision of a blade, overriding every other sensation the wilderness had to offer. Blood, fresh blood, and beneath it, something acrid and artificial, the unmistakable stench of burning fuel and melted alloy. Krell crouched low, his massive frame folding with practiced, predatory grace behind a cluster of violet ferns that grew taller than most sentient species stood upright. His scales, deep crimson along his chest that faded to absolute black down the ridge of his spine, caught the double sunset filtering through the canopy in fractured shaft of amber and rose. In another life, in another mood, he might have paused to appreciate the beauty of this world. Epsilon Reach was extraordinary in the way that truly dangerous things often were, lush, ancient, and utterly indifferent to anything so small as a single life. He had been tracking a thornback for the better part of 3 days. The creature was one of the local megafauna, a massive herbivore armored in overlapping plates of bone-dense cartilage, possessed of a temperament that made it fascinating prey. Not easy, never easy, but that was precisely the point. Krell had come here alone, deliberately, leaving his hunting pack behind without a word of explanation. He needed to prove something, not to them, but to himself, that he was still what he had always been. That 3 seasons and the comfortable sprawl of the colonial cities hadn't softened him, that the apex predator his ancestors had been still lived somewhere beneath the layers of civilization he'd been forced to accumulate. Vacerians were not built for colony living. They were not built for crowds, for noise, for the endless paperwork of coexistence. They were built for exactly this, the hunt, the silence, the kill. But the Thornback's trail had gone cold somewhere north of the ridge. And now, threading through the familiar language of the forest, bird calls, insect hum, the distant percussion of a river over stone, came this other thing, this wrong smell. His gut pulled at him before his conscious mind had finished processing the input. He moved forward, silent despite his 270 pounds of muscle and claw and coil ferocity. The Vacerian people had not risen to the top of their world's food chain by being loud or clumsy. Most of them, anyway. The wreckage materialized through the tree line like a wound in the landscape. A human shuttle, or what had been one, lay split open like overripe fruit dropped from an impossible height. Its hull was twisted and blackened, the metal peeled back in great curling sheets as if something enormous had tried to open it from the inside. The nose section had plowed a deep trench through the soft earth, ripping up dozens of trees before finally crashing to rest against a moss-blanketed boulder the size of a small building. Krell's lips pulled back instinctively, exposing rows of serrated teeth. Humans. Of course it was humans. They flew their tin-can ships through space with that infuriating, breezy confidence that came not from true capability but from blissful ignorance of how catastrophically wrong things could go. They zipped between star systems like the void between worlds was nothing more than a slightly inconvenient commute, seemingly unaware, or worse, unconcerned, that a galaxy was under no obligation to be kind to them. He should leave. The thought was immediate, practical, and correct. Human problems were not Vacerian problems. Getting entangled with their kind meant complications, official inquiries, statements of galactic authorities, the kind of bureaucratic aftermath that had a way of following Hunter for cycles afterward and making solitary trips like this one completely impossible. He had come here for peace, for purpose, not for this. His feet did not move. The emergency beacon was silent. Either it had been destroyed in the impact or someone had deliberately disabled it. Both possibilities were troubling, but in different ways. No beacon meant no rescue signal. No signal meant no cavalry inbound with their shiny armor and self-righteous attitudes. It meant that whoever had survived this crash, if anyone had, was utterly, absolutely alone. That thought sat uneasily in his chest. Then Krell's enhanced hearing caught something so small and fragile it nearly vanished beneath the ambient noise of the forest. A sound half swallowed by wind and ruin. A whimper, high-pitched, young, and saturated with a particular kind of misery that required no translation across species lines. His eyes closed for one brief, pained moment. Oh, no. He moved to the wreckage with the careful, deliberate grace of something that understood how easily things could be broken. His claws found purchase on twisted metal as he climbed through the torn cargo bay, scanning, sorting, cataloging. Supplies had been scattered everywhere by the violence of the impact. Medical kits burst open, ration packs shredded, clothing tangled with insulation foam and shattered equipment. Personal items lay among the debris with the heartbreaking randomness of catastrophe, a datapad with a cracked screen still glowing, displaying a family photograph frozen in cheerful, ordinary happiness. A child stuffed animal, some earth creature, a bear perhaps, lying torn and muddy against a support strut, one glass eye staring at nothing. Stories of lives interrupted. That was what debris fields always were. Krell had seen enough of them in his years to know. And there, wedged between two collapsed seats in the deepest recess of the cargo hold, half buried under a fallen panel and covered in a fine layer of dust and dried blood, a human child. Krell went absolutely still. The youngling couldn't have been more than 4 cycles old by human reckoning. Perhaps 5. Small even by the diminutive standards of her species, with dark hair matted and tangled, skin so pale beneath the grime that it looked like it had never seen proper sunlight. One small arm was bent at an angle that made his stomach lurch, a clean break, untreated. Bruises mapped a cruel geography across every visible inch of exposed skin, and lacerations traced thin red lines from forehead to chin. But the eyes were what stopped him entirely. Brown, like river bottom soil after rain. Wide and glassy with pain, rimmed red with long, exhausted crying. They found him across the wreckage and went wider still, not with fresh terror, but with a dull, defeated resignation of something that has already endured the worst and can no longer summon the energy to fear what comes next.